evening and welcome to Vantage from the lovely city of Gandhinagar, the capital of Gujarat, the city named after Mahatma Gandhi. Why are we here tonight? Because right behind me, a very important conversation is taking place. A G20 ministerial event on women's leadership and empowerment. India, as the G20 president, is taking the lead on bringing this issue to the front and center of the G20 agenda. We'll share notes on the interventions and policy prescriptions discussed here. In the show tonight, we will begin with the US. Its economy has been downgraded by a global rating agency and Washington is throwing a fit about it. In Poland, they're talking about moving soldiers to the border amid reports of an airspace incursion by Belarus. In Pakistan, they're suddenly talking about peace with India. In China, the biggest rainfall in 140 years has led to floods and chaos. Australia wants the right to work from home and they're moving court for it. And Canada has a new policy to stop people from smoking. We'll tell you all about it. The headlines first. Recep Tayyip Erdogan calls Vladimir Putin. The Turkish president has asked his Russian counterpart to not escalate tensions. The phone call comes as the grain deal remains stuck in limbo. Moscow exited the deal last month, blocking the supply of grain from Ukraine to the world. Pakistan Prime Minister says, quote-unquote, Afghan citizens are helping suicide bombers. This comes just days after a bombing in Pakistan's restive Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. More than 50 people were killed in the attack. Pakistan has seen an increase in attacks since the Taliban took power in 2021. Former US President Donald Trump has been indicted. He's been charged with plotting to overturn the 2020 election, which he lost. Some of the charges against Trump carry penalties up to 20 years in prison. This is his third criminal indictment since the month of March. Get ready for digital detox, Beijing style. Chinese children and teens will be cut off from the internet at night. Their smartphone use will also be curbed. The restrictions will come into force from September. Beijing says it is to fight internet addiction. Good news for tourists who fled wildfires in Greece. They can now return to the Rhode Island next year for a week and it will be free of charge. Thousands of visitors were forced to evacuate this summer due to the wildfires. America has been downgraded, and that's our lead story tonight. The US, as you would know, dominates the global financial world. Financial managers want to invest in America. A US government bond is considered as safe as gold. And the dollar, for all the pushback it faces, remains the world's default currency. But America's dominant position is now under stress. A leading credit rating agency has downgraded the US. The name of the agency is Fitch. It assesses creditworthiness of countries, and it believes that the US is not as trustworthy as it used to be. So today they announced a downgrade and the White House is pushing back. They've issued aggressive statements to counter the downgrade. This is, at best, damage control. We'll tell you why, but first the details of the downgrade. What does it even mean? What is a downgrade? Let me explain. Do you remember your grade card in school, your report card? It was an assessment of how you performed in different subjects. There were grades from A to F. A means you've aced it, F means you've failed. It's quite simple. And that's exactly how the Fitch rating works. It is a report card, but for governments. And what does it assess? Their financial health. Investors and lenders rely on these ratings. They use the rating to assess if they should buy a certain government bond. The rating helps them decide whether or not they should stay invested in a country. And this is the rating we're talking about tonight. Let's look at the Fitch report card. Earlier, America was rated AAA, AAA, the highest. The US was the school topper, the best in class, one of the safest places to keep your money. Now, it has been pushed one level down from AAA to AA+. How bad is that? Well, technically speaking, not very bad, just a notch down in the pecking order. But along with the rating, Fitch has also shared an analysis, and it merits a closer look. Fitch says this downgrade does not happen overnight. America's position has been gradually deteriorating. And broadly, there are three problems: erosion of governance, rising government deficit, and high levels of debt. In fact, debt is what Fitch is the most worried about. America's national debt stands at more than $30 trillion. It is the highest in the world, $30 trillion. And the US struggles to manage it. And on that front, Fitch has issued a scathing indictment. In fact, let me quote from that report. In Fitch's view, There has been a steady deterioration in standards of governance over the last 20 years. The repeated debt limit, political standoffs, and last-minute resolutions have eroded confidence in fiscal management. There is a clear takeaway from this. Fitch has lost trust in America. It doesn't think that the US is the best anymore. And that's not sitting well with Washington. The Biden administration has come down hard on Fitch. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the Fitch downgrade is quote-unquote arbitrary, and that it's based on outdated data. That's the term she used. Yellen said she strongly disagrees with Fitch. And the White House has said the same thing. Larry Summers has also weighed in. Larry Summers served as the Treasury Secretary during the Clinton years, and he says the Fitch decision is quote-unquote bizarre and inept. Then we have statements from some leading economists. They've used words like strange and puzzled. But if you look closely, it is not strange at all. America owes more than $32 trillion. That is a real number. It's not an estimate. And every few years, this debt leads to a political standoff. You see, the US has something called the debt ceiling. That's a concept that they have. The government cannot borrow beyond a certain limit. So when it is about to run out of cash, it tries to raise the limit, or the debt ceiling, as they call it. Lawmakers from both sides have to come together then. They have to pass a bill. To keep the government running, they must pass this bill. And this often leads to an impasse. In some cases, even a total shutdown of government. Since the 1970s, there have been a total of 21 shutdowns, 21 government shutdowns in the US. This year, they almost defaulted on their debts, the US government. The Biden administration wanted to borrow money, but the Republicans were not on board. It went down to the wire. They waited till the very last minute to pass the new budget and raise the borrowing limit. So the US narrowly avoided a default. There was no shutdown, but the uncertainty spooked the financial world. This Fitch report conveys the same reality. So instead of complaining, perhaps the US should set its house in order. Things are escalating in Eastern Europe. Poland is making a big claim. They say their airspace was violated by Belarus. They say 2 attack helicopters crossed over on Tuesday. If true, this is a major escalation. You see, Poland is a member of the NATO alliance. Belarus is Putin's biggest ally. A clash between these two countries would be disastrous. So what exactly happened? The first reports emerged early on Tuesday. Polish residents near the border posted suspicious pictures. They claim to have seen choppers with Belarusian symbols. At first, Poland denied this. But around evening, Warsaw made a U-turn. The Defense Ministry admitted that there was indeed a violation. So what changed? Poland says the helicopters were flying low, so the radars found it hard to detect them. But Belarus has another theory. They claim that Poland made a U-turn after getting orders from the West. Basically, that Warsaw is lying. So which side do we believe? If Belarusian President Lukashenko did order this move, it is a brave one. Maybe borderline reckless. He has allowed Russia to use Belarus as a staging ground. He's also hosting Wagner fighters, but he has drawn one red line, and that's joining the war officially. That's something Belarus has not done yet. Belarusian soldiers are still inside their barracks. Would President Lukashenko risk changing that? And that too by attacking a NATO country? Imagine if this alleged helicopter adventure went wrong. Belarus would have been at war with NATO. So logically, it makes no sense whatsoever. Having said that, Poland did warn about this. Their Prime Minister said Wagner fighters could attack from Belarus. Lukashenko, of course, has denied this claim. He says there is no rogue Wagner movement.
I have to teach my units, because an army that does not fight is half an army. You also understand this very well. I don't want to go to war. I don't want our guys to die. Therefore, we need to teach them. So Wagner are transferring their experiences. They give advice and suggest some things.
Well, Lukashenko is not helping his case, and I'll tell you why. Last month, Putin was hosting Lukashenko in St. Petersburg in Russia. Midway through the talks, the Belarusian president decided to joke. He said Wagner fighters are eager to go on a trip to Warsaw. Maybe he thought it was funny, but when the punchline of your joke is all-out war, people may not find it funny. And Putin too made allegations against Poland. He said Warsaw wants to seize Ukrainian land. So put together, you have a very complicated equation. Poland, Belarus and Russia have never been friends. They have unfinished business from the Soviet times, and now there is a new variable in this equation, and that variable is called the Wagner fighters. Around 1,000 of them are based in Belarus. Poland believes they could be used to wage a proxy war. If that happens, what will NATO do? That is the big question. Technically, Wagner is independent from Russia. They're now anti-Putin, remember? So a Wagner attack, can it be seen as a Russian attack? Well, Washington says absolutely.
This group, at the behest of the Russian government, because they do not work independently of the Russian government, is a threat to all of us, and we have to ensure that the message is clear that any attacks by the Wagner Group will be seen as an attack by the Russian government.
Now, a couple of things to note here. One, didn't the West cheer Wagner's mutiny? They billed it as some big defeat for Vladimir Putin. But now they're all making a U-turn. They say Wagner and Russia are the same. Second, the stakes are now much higher. Using Wagner was supposed to give Putin plausible deniability. He could have shifted the blame from himself, but Washington is on to him. They're saying Wagner or not, Moscow will take the blame if there is such an attack. So what is the next move? If Tuesday's incursion did happen, we should all be quite worried. Poland is moving around 1,000 soldiers to the border. They're preparing for the worst. And if Poland is attacked, NATO will have to join this war. It's a legal obligation. Remember the Article 5. If one member is attacked, all of them declare war. An attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. On the other side, Belarus too has a backup. Last month, Putin made a public promise to Lukashenko. He said an attack on Belarus would be an attack on Russia. So will things descend to that? Like I said, there is deep mistrust between Belarus and Poland, not just over Ukraine, but many issues. They also have guarantees from bigger powers, Poland from NATO, Belarus from Russia. So could they use this chance to settle personal scores? It's a dangerous prospect. Which is why we need calmer heads to prevail. And the last thing we need is irresponsible jokes and taunts. As it is, the war is escalating and spilling over. The attacks have intensified. Ukraine carried out drone attacks on Moscow. Russia sees this as provocation, its own attacks on Ukrainian cities notwithstanding. So Russia wants to retaliate. Meanwhile, Ukraine is pushing forth with its counteroffensive. They may or may not succeed, but they're going to need more weapons. That's certain. A seemingly uninterrupted supply of weapons, that's what Ukraine needs. Its key source are partners in Central Europe, but they've hit a roadblock. They don't have enough workers for their weapons factories. Here's a report.
Over 500 days into the conflict, Ukraine and its Western backers are confronting a new challenge. No, it's not the weapon supplies. Manufacturers are ready to meet Kyiv's requirements. What they are struggling with is talent. The workers needed to make the weapons are in short supply. A recruitment drive is underway in Central Europe. It's one of the key hubs where war supplies for Ukraine are built. Since the war began in 2022, factories in Poland and the Czech Republic have been churning out guns, shells and more. The output has already matched the size and scale of the Berlin War era. But the manufacturers think they can do better. They want to ramp up production, but they don't have enough workers. So the arms industry is rolling out lucrative incentives. A manufacturer in the Czech Republic has offered company-financed apartments for new hires and even free food in canteens. A Polish company has taken to social media. They are pushing ads on internet platforms to attract interest. But still, finding the right fit is a challenge. The reason is the tight labor market. Europe has one of the largest aging populations in the world. The weapons industry needs younger workers with technical skills. They are becoming harder to find. So, some manufacturers are turning towards alternatives. They are joining hands with local universities and exploring technologies like automation to expand. There is an urgency to ramp up production. The weapon suppliers are responding to demand. Central Europe is an important pipeline for Ukraine. Last year, 29 nations supplied major weapons to Kyiv. Out of the 29, 2 countries stood out: Poland and the Czech Republic. They sent more than 20% of Ukraine's arms needs. From tanks to armored vehicles, howitzers, air defense systems, helicopters, ammunition and rockets, Central Europe supplied all of this. And they intend to keep going, because the demand is showing no signs of slowing. Russia invaded Ukraine over a year back, and no side still has a decisive edge. The forces on both sides are fighting for every inch of territory, and they're leaving no stone unturned to gain the upper hand. Recently, Ukraine launched a counteroffensive. The goal was to push back the Russian forces and reclaim some of the lost territory. Progress has been slow, but Kyiv is pouring everything into the offensive, from heavy arms to even toy drones. Ukrainian forces have repurposed them for military use. On the front lines in Zaporizhia, a gamer-turned-soldier recently put a new gadget to the test. This drone might be small, but it packs a punch. It is flown straight into the target to inflict maximum damage.
Since I've been transferred to this unit to work with drones, every time I put on my goggles and take the joystick, I recall my mother telling me that those video games would not do me any good. Well, if this isn't useful, then what is?
The war in Ukraine is a frozen conflict, with no signs of simmering violence or bloodshed. So, as long as that's the case, the demand for weapons will thrive.
Brace yourself for this next story because Pakistan is talking about peace. It's one of the most absurd stories of the week. Maybe a tie with this human/bear in China. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif wants talks with India. Listen to this first.
We are prepared to talk to them, provided that the neighbor is serious to talk serious matters on the table. Because war is no more an option, that our neighbor has to understand that we cannot become normal neighbors unless abnormalities are removed, unless our serious issues are understood and addressed to through peaceful and meaningful discussions.
Classic Pakistan. Talk about war and peace in the same sentence. Just one advice for Shehbaz Sharif though. Next time, maybe mention who you're talking about. It's India, not neighbor. Now, there are two things which stand out in Shehbaz Sharif's statement. One, he's accusing India of not being serious. You heard his words. We're willing to talk provided the neighbor is serious. That's what he said. And two, he talks about abnormalities. Shehbaz Sharif says abnormalities must be removed if relations are to be normal. Good wordplay, but beyond that, what are these abnormalities? That Shehbaz Sharif did not specify. For India, it's always been terrorism. India has insisted that terror and talks cannot go hand in hand. We'll have to wait and see the response this time. But Shehbaz Sharif's comments were not isolated. Elsewhere, his Minister of State for Foreign Affairs was also talking about India. Her name is Hina Rabbani Khar, and her tone was quite different. Listen to this.
Then there is the East, okay, which is the darling of the West, but really has decided to be the darling of the West while at the same time being very, very belligerent within the East. So India, stands out as a country which is very, very open towards certain countries, but very, very closed-minded towards some of its own people and towards certain countries within the region.
Hina Rabbani Khar says India is trying to be the darling of the West. Maybe that's why India is the top buyer of Russian oil. Or why India criticizes Western comments on internal issues, or why India attends the SCO and BRICS summits. Plus, it's a bit rich coming from Pakistan. This is a country that spent most of the Cold War years doing America's dirty work. So less of a darling, more of a minion. Anyway, let's focus on what they're trying to do here. The Pakistani leaders. Sharif, at least on paper, is the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Any initiative aimed at peace is welcome, especially coming from Islamabad. But when Pakistan talks about peace, you must ask three questions. A, why now? B, do their actions match it? And C, does the army support it? The timing is indeed strange. Shehbaz Sharif is an outgoing prime minister. Why would he make a peace appeal to India? Normally, it is done to appease international lenders and Western countries. When Pakistan needs a bailout, they talk sweet. They pretend to be the nice guys. So could this be a similar attempt? The International Monetary Fund has released one payment for Pakistan, but reports say they're going to need more. Comments about peace and talks are usually green lights for lenders. They signal positivity. And there is precedent for Pakistan doing this. On the 17th of January this year, Shehbaz Sharif made a similar appeal. He offered talks with India. And guess what happened after 2 weeks? Pakistan held the first round of their talks with the IMF. So that's definitely a possibility. Now to the second question. What is Pakistan doing for this peace that they want? Well, pretty much nothing. Reports say border infiltrations are still happening. So is smuggling of narcotics. You see, there's a big difference between talking peace and working for peace. Pakistan only does the first. They talk. Finally, question number 3. Does the army approve of Shehbaz Sharif's statements? I would think so, because the army chief Asim Munir was present at the same event. Those comments by Shehbaz Sharif were made in his presence, the army chief's presence. Plus, the current government is supposed to be supported by the army. So I'm guessing they do agree. If you keep all the history aside, if you look at the pure logic of this appeal, it makes perfect sense. Pakistan desperately needs India's friendship. Their inflation is still at 28%. Their external debt is still unpaid. Around 8 million Pakistanis are likely to experience acute food shortage this season. And to top it all, the security situation is bad. Just this week, there was a suicide attack at a political rally. Around 56 people died. So on paper, Pakistan needs normal relations with India, very much. The so-called darling of the West could really help them out. Just look at Sri Lanka. India lobbied for Colombo at the IMF. Lenders from Japan and France are now lining up to help. In Pakistan, decisions are taken in the army's interest, not the people. So unless you see concrete actions to back up peace offers, you can never be sure. Nonetheless, this is an offer, and we'll have to wait and see how India responds. Vantage continues after a short break.
And the criticism, really, that the police did a shoddy job of first controlling what happened in New and then subsequently allowing the violence to flare up in other parts of Haryana. But the opposition is having none of this. Joining me now is the former Chief Minister of the state and the current Leader of the Opposition in the Haryana Assembly, Bhupinder Singh Hooda. Bhupinder Singh Hooda, thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us. The government has said, and I don't know if you got a chance to hear what the Home Minister said just moments ago, he says that this is a well-planned conspiracy and that the perpetrators will be brought to justice. I want to know your first reaction to what the Haryana government is saying.
This is what I said yesterday also. If it is a well-planned conspiracy, then why government was sleeping? Why didn't it take preventive steps? They're just putting 4 home guard there. Actually, whenever procession like that goes, it is duty of the government to provide security.
Okay.
And see that there is no law and situation खराब होती है नहीं होनी.
Now to the big story from India. Violence and rioting have gripped the state of Haryana. Religious sites have been vandalized, shops have been torched and looted. At least 6 people have been killed. The pictures are truly worrying. Some of the roads look like war zones with charred vehicles all around. The violence erupted in New. It is a village in southern Haryana. It is also close to one of India's biggest business hubs, Gurugram. The violence has spread there too. But what triggered it? On Monday morning, a Hindu rally was passing through New. Thousands of people were part of it. Some slogans were raised which triggered a standoff. The rally was allegedly attacked with stones. After this, things spiraled out of control. It became all-out religious violence. A mosque was set on fire in Gurugram. The cleric was stabbed to death. In total, at least 6 people have died, more than 70 others have been injured. Dozens of vehicles and shops have also been gutted. What is the government of Haryana doing about this? Around 116 people have been arrested, 90 others have been detained. The Chief Minister says those guilty will be punished. He's also asking for more central help. 20 companies of central forces are already deployed in the state of Haryana. The Chief Minister wants 4 more. Internet has been shut down in parts of southern Haryana, plus there is a curfew. You've probably heard dozens of debates on this story. Maybe seen multiple reports on how the violence unfolded, so we're not talking about that. We are talking about the bigger picture. Gurugram is often pitched as a cyber city, a hub of all things technology. Yet that very same place doesn't have internet right now. What sort of message does that send? And I'm not saying the shutdown is not justified. I'm saying things should never have reached this stage. We talk about making Gurugram a global city, a top destination for big companies. But put yourself in the shoes of a foreign investor or a CEO at a multinational company. Would you be confident about setting up shop here? Amid these pictures of charred vehicles and riot cops. Exactly my point. Gurugram has become a success story in recent years. It is home to thousands of production houses. Some of the biggest MNCs have offices there, like Nestle or Coca-Cola or Maruti Suzuki. But today, many of them are spooked. Companies have asked employees to work from home. You can't become the next Hong Kong or Singapore with such headlines. And I'm not just talking about the violence. Look at other indicators. Crimes against women were up 57% last year. Snatching cases up 27%. 1 person dies every day from road accidents in the city. Gurugram even has a gang problem. In the last 2 decades, around 15 top gangsters have been killed in violence. This year, a man was shot 13 times. These are not good numbers. They don't encourage locals, let alone foreign companies. The question is, what is the root cause? Does the state government not have enough resources? It's hard to believe that. Haryana is ruled by the BJP, the same party in the state and the centre, so there is no scope of federal roadblocks. Consider what happened this week. Haryana got 20 companies of central forces within 24 hours. So resources are very much available. But somehow they're not being used well. We saw a similar situation in Manipur. Same party ruling at the state and centre, yet no end to the violence. But both these issues are linked to law and order. It's the bread and butter of all governments, but clearly not in Haryana. From start to end, this is law and order failure. How were inciting slogans raised at a rally? How was the crowd allowed to pelt stones? How was the mob allowed to go on a rampage? The answer to all of these questions is the same, because law and order failed. So what needs to be done? Well, the situation is slowly returning to normal. Hopefully, the violence will end soon. But the state government's job does not end here. As citizens, we have some expectations from them. Going to office without being attacked, walking on the roads without being stone pelted, running our businesses without mobs at the door. Is that really too much to ask? If Gurugram wants to be a futuristic city, it must get the basics right. Our next story comes from China and Japan. 2 storms are wreaking havoc in these countries. Beijing is battling the fallout of Typhoon Doksuri, and Japan is facing off against Typhoon Khanun. Beijing is partially submerged in water and mud. The Chinese capital has recorded its heaviest rains in 140 years. 140 years, which means it's the heaviest rainfall in Beijing since records began. Meanwhile, Japan's Okinawa Island was battered by strong winds, heavy rain and destructive waves. More than a third of the island is without electricity, and it may take a while for things to improve. Here's more.
The rain seemed to have relented in Beijing, at least a little. That's because Typhoon Doksuri is moving on. But it left almost every part of Beijing submerged. These are visuals from one of the airports in the city. The runways were underwater and the flights were grounded. What you're looking at now is being called a graveyard of cars, all swept up and destroyed by the storm. Most of Beijing has been left with streets full of water, mud and trash. This is a wetland park in the city. The water levels have reached the treetops there, and the park has become home to a floating pile of garbage. Doksuri caused tremendous destruction. It will take a while to clean up. After being battered for 4 days and 4 nights, the Chinese capital seems to have gotten a break. But those 4 days took their toll. At least 11 people have died in Beijing, and some are still missing. Chinese paramilitary forces have been involved in the search and rescue. They've been taking out inflatable rafts to navigate through the roads that have turned into rivers, risking their lives to try and save Beijing's stranded residents. Reports say 2 of the 11 casualties in the city were rescue workers. They've also been delivering food and supplies via helicopter to residents trapped in their homes. The storm may be leaving Beijing, but it's heading further inland. Hundreds of thousands have been evacuated from cities in the neighboring Hebei province. That's where Typhoon Doksuri is headed. The typhoon broke numerous records in Beijing. The city saw its worst rainfall since records began 140 years ago. Since Saturday, it has received 744.8 millimeters of rainfall. It was worse than even the storm of 2012. That was when Beijing last saw similar amounts of rain. Just 40 hours after the rains began, Beijing received the average rainfall for the entire month of July. A month's worth of rainfall hit China's capital in less than 2 days, which explains why the city is in disarray. Now that the typhoon has gone, Beijing has some breathing space to work on rescue and recovery. But in nearby Japan, the chaos is just beginning. Typhoon Kanun is wreaking havoc there. Kanun means jackfruit in Thai, but the sweet-sounding name takes nothing away from its fury. It has just passed the island of Okinawa. Okinawa is located in the far south of Japan, and this is the state of the island. Cars have been tossed aside by Typhoon Kanun's strong winds. The winds uprooted trees in the island as well. They led to huge waves crashing down on Okinawa's shores. And the typhoon also led to a massive power outage. More than a third of the island's houses were without power. About 200,000 people were affected. All flights from the island's airport were suspended, leaving residents and visitors at the mercy of the typhoon. The typhoon is moving west towards China at the moment, but it is expected to return. Come Friday, Typhoon Kanun is expected to turn towards Okinawa again, and once again drench the island. So the island is bracing itself for a tough week. One thing is certain, none of this is normal. These extreme weather events are the result of human-induced climate change. We are making things worse. How long till we accept that our constant greenhouse gas emissions are harming us in the long run? How long before we work earnestly towards fixing our mess?
Now let's talk about another Southeast Asian country, Singapore, where the bottom line is, well, the bottom line. Back in 2007, the government made a major announcement. It had hiked the salaries of its ministers, not by 20 or 30%, but by 60%. An increment of anyone's dreams, really, 60% hike. The Prime Minister saw his pay jump to over $2 million. It was 5 times what then US President George Bush was making. Why was Singapore so generous with its ministers' salaries? Well, there is no hidden or evil reason here, hopefully. They simply wanted to pay the lawmakers well, to ensure that they were happy, to deter corruption, and to keep the politics clean. Today, Singaporean lawmakers are among the best paid in the world. Their salaries are comparable to top earners in the private sector. But here's the thing. When the government pays its leaders well, it also demands accountability. It always should, but in this case particularly. And a clear example of this is before our eyes. Meet S. Iswaran, the Transport Minister of Singapore. He was arrested last month in relation to a corruption investigation. Incidents of corruption are rare in Singapore, at least reportedly and until recently. Singaporean lawmakers are known to stand on high moral ground. And with Eastwaran's corruption scandal too, the parliament refuses to lower its pedestal. An investigation is still underway, but Eastwaran is already facing the music. His pay has been cut by 82%. You heard that right. A cabinet minister under investigation has got a pay cut, and that too by more than 80%, 80. It's almost unbelievable. How many times do you hear that? Not enough, I would say. Reports say this has happened only twice in the past, both times in Japan. In 2021, 5 officials in Japan's communication ministry received pay cuts. What for? For whining and dining. They enjoyed expensive meals sponsored by the companies they worked with. In 2018, Japan's then finance minister Taro Aso took a pay cut. It was voluntary. He let go of his salary for 1 year because 20 of his officials tampered with public documents. Can you believe it? The finance minister of a country taking 1 year salary cut, taking responsibility for his team's actions. Sounds almost dystopian. That is not to say that ministers do not take pay cuts. Of course they do. All across the world on several occasions. I'll give you some examples. This year, Mozambique reduced the pay of its senior officials to reduce its salary bill. Last year, Malaysian ministers took a 20% pay cut. This was to show solidarity as their country suffered economic troubles. During the pandemic in 2020, both Indian and Kiwi ministers took a pay cut, which is all very well, but more often than not, these moves fail to impress people because leaders across the world have been involved in corruption charges. Take, for instance, Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan. He has more than 100 cases of corruption against him. Whatever the talk of political vendetta, there is proof of corruption against Imran Khan. He faces the law. Here in India, scores of leaders have corruption cases. What action do they face? How often is justice served? Forget punishment. Do they even get a pay cut? And that is not enough punishment for a corrupt lawmaker. But it makes a significant point. Lawmakers say they serve their country and their people. Do they face action when they don't do their job well? Do they get an incentive when they do it better? In a world where all of us are assessed on the basis of performance, I think it's time we demand better accountability and more transparency from lawmakers. Singapore's example is an interesting one. What do you think? Do you think salary cut should be punishment for a minister who doesn't deliver or is under investigation? Write to us with your thoughts. Our next story is about work from home, the modern work conundrum. It has divided people like few things can. There's a bunch of people who like their comfort and freedom and want to continue working from home. And there's another set that says remote work compromises productivity and teamwork. Is it just a war of preferences, or does data support one case over another? And that debate is very much on. In countries like Australia, it has turned into a lightning rod. Australians are so mad about returning to office, they're taking companies to court. They want the right to work from home forever. Here's a report.
The worst of the pandemic is over. People are back to living their normal lives. But what exactly is the new normal? Is it working from home? Is it working from office? Is it a bit of both? That's up for a debate. And it's turning out to be quite a contest. Elon Musk may call for an end to work from home, but it's unlikely he will succeed in Australia. Australians have the world's strongest work from home rights. In fact, they hate working from office so much that they're taking companies to court over it. Unions in Australia are setting a precedent. They are fighting tooth and nail with companies, with banks, and even with the federal government, all for one reason. They want work from home to become the norm. In April, the CEO of National Australia Bank ordered 500 senior managers to ditch work from home. They were asked to come back to the office full-time. Now, this is Australia's third largest bank. But the public sector union fought back. They challenged the directive. In July, the bank had to give in. It agreed to a union deal that gives all employees the right to request work from home. The same week, the union struck another deal. It now lets Australia's 120,000 federal employees request work from home for an unlimited number of days. So, Australia may sound like work from home heaven. And it is. But is this the picture across the globe? Employees may like working in their pajamas, but companies want them back on their desk. A survey asked 35,000 workers and employers in 34 countries. Only 19% of the workers wanted to return to the office. They wanted 2 days of work from home every week. Meanwhile, the bosses wanted just one. Does this mean the era of work from home is over? Companies were hoping that it would be once they issued mandates. But they are clearly wrong, like what happened in Australia. So the end of that debate is on the horizon. There's a clear gap between what workers want and what companies think is good for them. This sets the stage for a historic confrontation, one that could drag on forever. So is the inevitable a compromise, a hybrid work model? Most probably, yes.
Meanwhile, a new era has already begun in Canada. Well, for Canadian smokers anyway, the country's stringent new cigarette regulations have come into force. How stringent? Well, this is the nation that pioneered graphic images on cigarette packages. So it really had to go the extra mile to tighten the screws further, and it has. The countdown has begun in Canada for warnings on every individual cigarette. That's right, every Canadian cigarette will soon have a warning printed on it. It's one of the many measures they're introducing to discourage people from smoking. Here's our report.
Smokers of the world, lend us your ears, for your eyes are about to get beset by a new type of warning. Canada is at it again. The country has come up with a new way to drill home old warnings. You already know that smoking is bad, but now Canada will remind you with every cigarette you pull out of your pack. Because you see, a law has come into effect. And in a few years, it'll reflect on each and every Canadian cigarette. The first smoke from your new cigarette pack may say, cigarettes damage your organs. The next could be different, marginally. It could say cigarettes cause cancer, or that cigarettes cause leukemia. You know, for those of you who like a more scientific warning. It may say tobacco smoke harms children, or for those of you without little ones of your own, cigarettes cause impotence. And in a poetic way to round off your chain-smoking journey, the last warning could be poison in every puff. You see, Canada really has brought about a new law to enable all this. It's called Tobacco Products Appearance, Packaging and Labeling Regulations, and it came into force yesterday. What the law aims to do is simple: encourage people to quit smoking, using every opportunity to hammer it into them that cigarettes are harmful. Canada has always been on the forefront of the war against tobacco. In 2001, it was the first country to mandate pictorial warnings on cigarette packs. This new law is an extension of that. Maybe you have found a way to ignore those blood-curdling images. Or if you're in a country like India, maybe you just buy loose cigarettes, never having to look at the graphic warnings at all. Well, Canada has now found a new way to get its message across nonetheless. Each and every cigarette will be printed with a warning, the kind we told you about earlier. So every smoke break will also be a reminder of the harm cigarettes do. And remember, after Canada pioneered the graphic package warning, the idea spread. So don't be surprised if you start getting warning-laced cigarettes in your country soon as well. Now, the cautionary cigarettes aren't the only change Canada's new law brings. It's updating the packaging too. It'll keep changing the image on the packages regularly, because research shows that after a while, people tune things out, even terrifying images of cancer. So, Canada will ensure the pictures keep changing before you can learn to ignore them. Also, the warning pictures will cover 75% of a cigarette box in the future. Canada's standardizing the warning size, in case cigarette manufacturers try and find loopholes. And speaking of loopholes, this won't just apply to cigarette packs. All Canadian tobacco products will soon bear the warning signs. But the new law will take time to be implemented. Canada is taking a staggered approach. There are different deadlines for different tobacco products to adopt these new standards. But come April 2025, every Canadian cigarette or cigar will have to conform to these rules. So Canada is taking the fight against tobacco seriously, as it should. Tobacco is a harmful and addictive substance. It causes millions of deaths and costs billions in public healthcare funding. Over the years, Canadian governments have successfully reduced the amount of smokers in Canada, from about half of the population in 1965 to just about 13% today. That's a massive reduction, and it takes dedication to achieve that kind of progress. Dedication and perhaps innovative steps, like the new individual cigarette warnings. But will the remaining smokers heed the warnings on each of their poison sticks? Or will they just get blown away in a puff of smoke?
And finally, it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story, starting with Jerusalem. The August full moon, also called the supermoon, rose above the old city. It was the first of the two supermoons to be witnessed this month. In Sri Lanka, an uninvited guest appeared during a Lanka Premier League match. Players were as shocked as the spectators. We'll introduce you to the guest. Meanwhile, in China, the video of a bear is doing the rounds. It shows the bear standing on its hind legs inside a zoo enclosure. The video has sparked a debate. Is it really a bear or a man in a bear costume? That's the burning question in China right now. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1990, Iraq invaded its small but oil-rich neighbor Kuwait. It took only a few hours to capture Kuwait City. The Emir of Kuwait fled to Saudi Arabia. Iraq not only gained control of 20% of the world's oil reserves, but also a substantial coastline on the Persian Gulf. We're leaving you with that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow from Gandhinagar.
One thing that's right.
Cricket field, I think we've got to wait for him to just exit. I don't know.
Looks massive and who's the fourth umpire? He's a brave guy. Looks like it's. That must be a first. This type of a hold-up.
This is serious business.
Nervous now. Which kid bag?
Mr. Huda,
Government is failed government, non-performing government.
But
Government has to perform.
but Mr. Huda, ये बताइए कि if there is a mob of 600, 700 people with weapons, with lathis, stones, pistols, who are attacking this yatra, and 100 people have been arrested since Monday, how do you say that the government has not been proactive enough? How do you say that the government has failed? Because they are saying that over 40 FIRs have been registered, over 100 people have been detained, have been arrested.
It is all peaceful area. The feeling of all brotherhood over there. This first time happening because of this laxity of the government. Government should have anticipated this thing. It should have prevented it could have been avoided. It is not that.
But Mr. Huda, you don't see this as a concerted attack on Hindu processions. The procession that got attacked by the Bajrang Dal, it had police permission. It has been going on there for the last 3 years, is what I'm given to understand. This is the 4th year. Yes, there were some provocative slogans that were raised, but the response to provocative slogans can't be stone pelting from rooftops, using guns, using heavy duty weapons, ramming a bus into a cyber police station. Those are the act of criminals. How do you respond to that?
That is later on. Police, that has to be, everything has to be provided, security has to be provided. I say, during my time, there were so many yatras going on, even political processions, they go, that security is the duty of the state government to provide security.
No, but normalcy is slowly being restored, not just in Haryana, but I believe tensions are persisting in other states as well, one of which happens to be Rajasthan, which is run by the Congress. The violence has spilled over into Rajasthan. What do you have to say about that? Because this can't be seen purely from...
A very warm welcome. You're watching Breaking on News 18. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. We dive into this segment with some breaking inputs coming in as far as Prime Minister Narendra Modi is concerned. This is just ahead of 2024 Lok Sabha elections. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi today met NDA MPs from Uttar Pradesh. He advised NDA MPs to be active on social media and deploy the services of professional social media persons to enhance their performances in the digital world. He also asked MPs to take central government schemes to the masses and dispel the rumours being spread by the opposition. This is Prime Minister Modi now solidifying his strategy for the upcoming election in 2024. And remember, it's not just today that Prime Minister Modi met with these NDA MPs. It was also on Monday. Let me quickly go across to our correspondent Payal Mehta, who's joining me on the phone line. Payal, when we talk about this very significant meeting that has happened today, there was also one where Prime Minister met another set of NDA MPs on Monday. When you look at these meetings, what does it indicate about the kind of synergy that Prime Minister is now trying to build for 2024?
As far as 2024 is concerned, Akanksha, the message is very simple, that the NDA has to come back with an overwhelming majority. But there is a different message that the Prime Minister today has left with the MPs from the eastern part of Uttar Pradesh. That is the same region from which the Prime Minister himself has been elected as an MP, and that is from Varanasi. The Prime Minister has said one very, very important thing. He has said that Garibi hi sabse badi jati hai. It means, being poor is the biggest issue in this country, and probably, that's the reason he has been speaking about working for the welfare of the poor. He's also asked his MPs to be active on social media, to take the work of development, etc. to the people. All of these things have been said in the past, but a very, very significant message saying that Garibi sabse badi jati hai, and that is the reason his government for the last 9 years has worked on the welfare of the people as well. Now, in this meeting, not only did you have MPs from Bharatiya Janata Party, but also the NDA partners, including Apna Anupriya Patel, who was also in this meeting as well. So it's a very, very important meeting. Another round of meeting is currently on, even as we speak, and the Prime Minister is meeting all the MPs from South India. Now, South India has been the focus as far as the BJP is concerned over the last 9 years. It will be important to see what message the Prime Minister is able to give to those MPs over there to boost their performances, to boost the performance of the NDA in the upcoming election season as we build up to 2024. Akanksha.
When you compare the efforts being made by Prime Minister and overall the NDA, how do you look at the efforts being made this time? We are seeing a greater synergy, a more multi-pronged effort coming in compared to previous general elections.
Well, yes, NDA has always had one meeting at least, ahead of every election, whether it is 2014, 2019 or now 2024. But you're seeing more synergy coming in with the fact that there are these cluster round of meetings where, not only the MPs from the BJP, but even the NDA will get a guidance from the Prime Minister, the biggest leader and of course the leader of the NDA, in terms of how to go forward. There is so much that the NDA government has done over the last 9 years that needs to be taken to people. There is so much a combination that goes into place, and that's one of the reasons in each of these meetings. Special care is also Akanksha taken to make sure that there is a culture blend over there. The welcome that you see, the kind of gamuchas that are given to people to welcome them to these meetings. The cuisine, for example, the Eastern UP cuisine today showcase was chaat and bati chokha, and also in the South Indian meetings there will be cuisine from all over the place as far as South India is concerned, right from idiyappam to appam to of course ragi dosa and to lemon rice. All of these reasons are also being presented so the MPs can have an exchange.
All right. Many thanks to you, Payal, for bringing in all those latest inputs. And with that, let's now shift focus over to Haryana. All right, now we are learning that the situation continues to remain tense in Haryana and parts of Rajasthan. Union Minister Inderjeet Singh met Prime Minister Modi and briefed him about the situation in Haryana. Today, members of the Bajrang Dal and Vishwa Hindu Parishad also held protest rallies in several parts of the national capital against the communal violence in Haryana's Nuh. Meanwhile, Haryana's Chief Minister Manohar Lal Khattar has also announced support for those who suffered property damage during the turmoil and warned of strict action against these perpetrators. CNN News 18 has accessed the FIR registered in the case, which states that it was a well-planned conspiracy where 600 to 700 vandals pelted stones at the police at Adbar Chowk during the yatra. Here's more.
ये सारा जो विषय आया है, इसके पीछे किसका हाथ है, कैसे शुरू हुआ, इन सब बातों के ऊपर भी प्रोसेस चल रही है. उस सारी प्रोसेस में कोई भी दोषी है उसको बख्शा नहीं जाएगा. ये सारी योजना हमारी इसमें बनी है. नू में जो लॉस हुआ है, नुकसान हुआ है, प्रॉपर्टी का भी वहाँ जान माल सब नुकसान हुआ है, तो जान के नाते से अलग घोषणा करेंगे, लेकिन उनका जो माली नुकसान है, गाड़ियाँ फूकी हैं, कुछ और एसेट्स जो दुकानें हैं, तो उसका भी इसी पोर्टल में एक प्रकार से जानकारी लेंगे और उसी आधार पर उसकी भी स्कीम बना करके उनको सबको दिया जाएगा. देखिए, जहाँ तक मोनू मानेसर की बात है, मोनू मानेसर के खिलाफ जो पिछला केस FIR वो राजस्थान सरकार की है. राजस्थान पुलिस उसके खिलाफ कार्रवाई करने के लिए स्वतंत्र है. हमारी मदद जितनी चाहिए उनको करेंगे. आउटसाइडर्स का चूंकि अब लगातार जितने सोशल मीडिया पर जो चीज़ें चली हैं उनको भी चिन्हित किया जा रहा है. हमारा जो साइबर डिपार्टमेंट है उसमें लगा है.
And staying with focus on Haryana, we have some breaking inputs coming in. We are now learning that internet is going to remain suspended in several districts of Haryana. This includes Nuh, Faridabad, Palwal, Sona, Pataudi until 5th of August. That only goes on to indicate that the situation on ground zero only remains critical and tense. For more details, let's quickly go across to our reporter Anshul. Anshul, if you could throw more light on these details, and as I was saying, that this only goes on to indicate how critical the situation is. Also, not to forget what the Home Secretary has had to say, that the role being played by social media in fueling the riots has been extremely adverse.
Well, definitely, Akansha, this is an order passed by the administration in the state, clearly indicating that, since there is a lot of turmoil in the state, there is a rumor mongering going on. In order to stop all of that, there is an internet suspension that has been ordered. And remember that this is one of the most important and the first precautionary measure that is taken whenever there is some kind of a communal or there is a riotous situation there, in fact. But at the same point of time, the police still has no answers with regards to, who are the real perpetrators of this particular violence, though the FIR actually says that it was a clear conspiracy to actually incite communal tensions in the state. We have seen how Nuh has reported a lot of violence, and in fact it had spread to also other parts of, in fact, the state of Haryana. Now the administration is though clueless with regards to who are the real perpetrators, but this precautionary measure of, in fact, internet suspension has been ordered so that no further violence would actually take place, or there would be some kind of a turmoil situation that could erupt in the state of Haryana.
Absolutely. Also, we are learning of a committee being formed which will be monitoring the social media activities. Could you also throw more light on if there's been any proper monitoring being done by the government to ensure that there's no further social media activity taking place as far as fanning those communal sentiments are concerned? All right, we seem to have lost our connection with Anshul as of now. But on that note, let me also bring you some ground reports that have come in from Gurugram.
We are currently reporting from the cyber hub of the Gurugram city. As of now, as far as the district administration is concerned, there is no official order yet saying that the offices have been asked to remain shut, or they have been asked to encourage work from home facility. But there are some of the employees who have received call from their HR. They have been directed that until further order, they have to perform the exercise of the work from home facility in view of the violence which is currently erupting in some part of the Haryana state in particular. These are the visuals we are showing you from this particular place. You can see in comparison to other days, there is less crowd which can be seen. Only a few handful of people have been asked to come here, and there is no official order yet from the district administration. But what we do know is that only few of the people can be seen here at the Cyber Hub city. There are some other companies as well who have been advising their employees to exercise work from home until the further orders.
भिवाड़ी में हिंसा के दूसरे दिन अब पुलिस लगातार गश्त चल रही है। इस वक्त आप ये तस्वीरें देख सकते हैं कि पुलिस यहाँ पर लगातार जो पूरे इलाके जहाँ पर तोड़फोड़ हुई है वहाँ पर गश्त चल रही है। लगातार पुलिस की पेट्रोलिंग कर रही है उन इलाकों में। आज हालांकि शांति है, लेकिन तोड़फोड़ काफ़ी ज़्यादा हुई है। यहाँ पर आप देख सकते हैं कि किस तरीके से इस चिकन सेंटर को इसको तहस नहस किया गया। यहाँ पर तस्वीरों में देखेंगे कि आप देखेंगे किस तरीके से सारे तमाम जो ग्लास है वो तोड़े गए। इस वक्त यह जो पुलिस की टीम है वो भी तमाम जो सबूत है वहाँ लेने की कोशिश कर रही है। सारी चीज़ें काम पुलिस की कार्रवाई लगातार जारी है यहाँ पर। और क्योंकि जिस तरीके